having me, Karen. I love that last talk. I thought there were a lot of great messages from it that really resonated with me. And there's actually something I came across on Instagram this morning, which will help shape my talk, which is I saw this graphic that said, how can I make this obstacle the greatest thing that's ever happened to me? How can I make this obstacle the greatest thing that's ever happened to me? And Aish in her talk, talked about the fact that you've overcome 100% of obstacles that you've encountered, a lot around living from a place of strength versus living from a place of fear, the whole idea of surrendering control, and then finally, that message, be it because you are it. And a lot of times in my own work, we often talk about, let's not talk about overcoming, but instead reframe it as becoming. So if we go ahead and show the first photo, I thought I'd start with a little bit of an origin story because it's really important to kind of think about, what are we bringing and carrying with us in our own narratives. So this is a photo of my family. I'm the youngest of four. I'm the one wearing that stylish red sweater. My mom is a refugee from the Vietnam War, and my dad is an immigrant from Taiwan. And so I am the first generation daughter of Asian immigrants. And I wanted to bring that up because I carry a lot of those cultural values into who shows up. So there's intergenerational trauma that's happening there that's being carried through the story. There are a lot of different cultural values around how every individual within the family is a representation of the family, and you want to do everything possible to avoid shame. So I may revisit some of this a little bit later. So if we move to the next photo, this is kind of where the turning point in my life was. So over Thanksgiving weekend, when I was in fourth grade, my mom had to actually travel to Taiwan for a business trip. So my dad and a couple siblings and I decided that we would go drop her off at the airport. And on the way home, my dad actually lost control of the car and ended up having like a little bit of a spasm, and we just shot across this empty highway. So it was a one-vehicle car accident. As a result, he unfortunately passed away, and I sustained, quite a few injuries. So I actually paralyzed my right arm, severely limiting its use to this day. It's known as a brachial plexus injury. And I also ended up breaking a couple bones in my left leg. So this is actually a photo of me and my maternal grandmother while I was at the hospital. So I'm covered up in blankets. I'm wearing this, again, you see the fashionable, I'm wearing a fashionable cast, and the little rainbow part is coming out underneath. But that was a really hard experience, not only because of what had happened, but also because of the cultural values that my family carried along with us. So I just wanted to go over some of those and how those impacted the view through which I moved about the world. So the first is death in the family is very taboo. It means that something was wrong with the family, so someone needed to die. And a lot of these are rooted in, very old traditions. And so after my dad passed away, we actually never talked about my dad again. And to the external world, he was away on a trip. So as a 9-year-old girl, I felt like I really didn't have space to comprehend what had happened to my family structure. But I also didn't have space to grieve and to really mourn this loss, because to the external world, we were presenting a narrative that our family unit was still intact. The second thing that happened was just the trauma of the accident in itself. So in certain Asian cultures, mental health conditions aren't really things that are addressed, because if I look at my mom's journey before she came to America, my parents just worked so hard in order for me and my siblings to be able to have the life that we lived. And so why, there was always the thinking, why are you complaining? Your parents worked so hard to get here. And so as a result, there aren't really spaces to kind of sit in that trauma and sit in that grief. So within my family, after the car accident, we never talked about the car accident again. It was kind of like another, this morning I equated it to going to the grocery store. It's just something that happened and then it was the next day. So again, as a child, not really having space to really understand what had happened and really kind of unravel the fact that that was trauma. And then the third thing that happened was that I acquired a disability. So physical disabilities within certain Asian cultures are very hidden. The child normally is never seen. The physical disability is seen as shame to the family. And the reason why a physical disability, again, in an older school of thought, the reason why a physical disability happened is because something was wrong with the family. And so if I look at everything that happened with this incident, the mental health situation, the trauma, the fact that there was a death, the fact that I did acquire a disability, all of it just represented shame within my family. And so, it's interesting to me because sometimes I look at this photo and I'm just covered in blankets. And I actually think that that is a physical manifestation of what was happening to me internally, with the fact that I just felt like I had to hide everything. And so growing up was very difficult. I wore a sling all the time, which, since my arm was paralyzed, I probably didn't need to. But the sling was a visible reminder to the external world that something was injured or something was wrong. And what was interesting was one of my hardest memories growing up was this physical education class that I had to get dressed for every single day. And it was mandatory for fourth grade until, ninth or 10th grade. And so I'd get dressed for a class every single day that no one wanted me to be at. And every single day, it felt like I was putting on a uniform for what was just, it felt like Groundhog Day. It was just a reliving of the worst day ever, which is no one wanted me to be there. When it was time to pick teams, always the last kid picked. I don't even think picked is the right word to use there. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. It was never acknowledging what had happened, always trying to hide it, and kind of just wanting to make myself hidden, cover myself, want to feel small. And a lot of people ask me kind of when the turning point was when I decided that I didn't really want to live in that victim narrative anymore, and I wanted to take ownership of my identity and my story. And if we go to the next photo, I think a big part of it was really rooting myself in community. And this is a photo of me and a handful of my now friends at New York's Disability Pride Parade. And so fast forward, that car accident happened in 1997. Fast forward to 2009 is when I came up with the first iteration of the organization that I run now, Diversability. And the reason why I started Diversability was a couple things. Number one is I just really so badly wanted community. I grew up feeling so socially isolated, so socially excluded, not having outlets or places or space to really feel the things I needed to feel. And so I just wanted to find some friends. And then the second thing was that because no one ever asked me about my disability, I never learned how to talk about it in a way where I felt strong and powerful in my narrative. I was always talking about it in terms of seeking pity or feeling like a victim. And so when I started bringing and building this community together, what I realized was that, number one, that was the first time that I had ever shared my story publicly about the car accident. So this took 12 years to finally just let this story out of my body. And what ended up happening was, I think the most powerful thing in emotional sharing and emotional storytelling is the ability to look at what has happened to you and validate it. Our stories are so real and they need to be heard. And the second thing that happened when we created this community was the fact that we realized that other people were really yearning to figure out what their own narratives were as well. And so if we go to the next photo, the creation of Diversability has really paralleled my own. So I'm wearing the same splint. It's a little bit faded now, But I wanted to kind of share a little bit about this splint because I wore a splint immediately after the car accident, which looked very similar. You know, this white stuff with the Velcro and the pink lining. And I decided about a year or two ago to get another splint because with paralysis you'll have muscle atrophy and a couple other things happen. And so when I got the splint, I felt kind of sad because, again, similar to the sling, it was a visible marker that something was wrong. And one of my friends had an artist friend named Forrest Stearns and asked, hey, like, what if my friend draws something on your splint? And so I thought about what I wanted this splint to say, what statement I wanted it to say. And so this splint, and actually I'll probably show you if you can see it, this splint has a picture of a 9-year-old girl. And so here is her face, and her arm is sprawled across, which you can also see in the photo a little bit better. And she's hugging an elephant, and this is the eye, and the trunk kind of extends all the way down here. And what I wanted that to be was I felt like my arm and my disability was always the elephant in the room. It was the thing that I felt like I couldn't talk about. I felt like my trauma and my grief and this story was this elephant that was so big that it just wanted to come out and be big. And so I wanted 9-year-old Tiffany to hug that elephant and really be a visible symbol of embracing that story for everything that it is. And I also had the word, it looks much more visible on the photo, but I had the word proud written across the top strap here because a couple reasons. The first is I think about a lot of people who have experienced childhood trauma. And, you know, if I revisit this Instagram photo that I came across this morning about obstacles, for those of us who have experienced trauma or something really adverse in our childhood, oftentimes our outcomes are not as favorable. And I just feel extremely proud of the journey that I've been on for the last 20 plus years of really owning my disability narrative, really owning my trauma and my grief story, and still being a work in progress through those. But then also acknowledging and respecting and valuing the values that my parents brought with me that I carry through in every room that I walk into as well. And the second reason why I put proud on there is because Disability Pride, when we first started Diversability, we had applied for like a little grant, and I had written that I was looking to start a movement around Disability Pride. And when I met up with the grant committee, the decision makers, they asked me what that phrase meant because they couldn't understand how someone could be disabled and proud of that disability identity. And the longer amount of time that I've spent really entrenched within this community, I have become so proud of my own disability identity and my disability journey. And one of the other things I want to mention along those lines is that I think that pride is something, you know, I think about kind of what Aish talked about like living from a place of fear versus living from a place of strength. I think that I just chose to feel strong in my story. And one of the things I talk about a lot is that I really think that disability can be the reason for us to belong, not just the reason for us to exclude historically. So if we move to the next photo, and the last two photos kind of come together, but one of the things I've realized is one of the best ways for us to really celebrate life is through play. And one of the things I've realized is after the car accident, I just felt like I couldn't be a kid anymore. My entire childhood was filled with doctor's appointments of trying to fix my arm, physical therapy, acupuncture, and then, of course, getting dressed for this class that no one wanted me to be there. And what I realized is that the world can be my playground. And so this is a photo of me in Iceland doing a one-armed plank. And I think what's been really rewarding for me along this journey is the fact that physical activity, I always equated physical activity in my physical education class with the fact that part of my body was disabled. But what I've come to realize is that my physical wellness is not only my arm. And so to be able to, go to Iceland, and then if we move to the last photo, and then ultimately climb Mount Kilimanjaro earlier this year, not as cool as Mount Everest, maybe equally as cool, as we'll see in our next speaker, but I think it's gotten me really thinking about, again, this question. I feel like I keep having to open it on my phone, of how can I make this obstacle the greatest thing that's ever happened to me? And if I look back at my life, and of course I feel like I'm still in my prime and it's still going, but I am just so proud, again, I'm so proud of the journey that I've been on. As I said, we have overcome 100% of the obstacles that have come our way. And I guess I want to close by having all of you guys think about what are the figurative and literal mountains that you still have to climb and conquer. Thanks.